8:39 exactly. News and views right here on Salam Media. And we have on standby Ayesha Kajee, Research Fellow at Africa Asia Dialogues, to talk to us about the situation playing out in Sudan. We do know that Sudan's military leader has declared a state of emergency after arresting Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok in an apparent coup d'etat. Here's let's just hear what has happened since the attempted coup. Aisha, assalamu alaikum, welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We spoke about this issue a
ago.
little while ago, not thinking that it would come to this point. And also, this was some form of a coalition type of government in place, the military and civilian rule. Why has it failed so dismally with just being in place for a mere couple of days or weeks?
Well, as you know, a month ago there was a failed coup, attempted coup, in Sudan on the 21st of September, which was largely led by those loyal to the old Omar al-Bashir regime and was resisting his handover to the International Criminal Court, for example. And since then, tensions between the civilian members and the military members of the transitional government have really come out into the open. And currently, Sudan remains divided between those who want that interim government to dismantle and want to go back to military rule, and those, particularly in Khartoum and some of the other urban centers, who want to see the retention of the status quo and progress towards democratic elections, which are scheduled for 2023. The arrest of Mr. Hamdok and other members, civilian members of the Transitional Council, means that basically everything that happens from now on is currently illegal under the interim constitution. So the state of emergency, for example, is illegal because only Prime Minister Hamdok had the power to declare a state of emergency. Of course, the arrests are illegal. Nobody seems to know where Mr. Hamdok and his colleagues, several of them are. The state radio and television in Khartoum's city of Omdurman has been taken over by the military. There are reports that media workers, both of the state broadcaster and independent media organizations, have been arrested. There's been internet blackout for much of the time since this began yesterday morning. What we do know is that civilians have come out in the thousands to protest this, and at least 7 people have been killed by direct fire from soldiers, and at least 140 injured.
So it's turning pretty violent, pretty ugly. Innocent people are being killed. What do you believe needs to happen to quell, number one, the protests, and possibly get talks going once again?
Well, I think several things need to happen. Intergovernmental organizations like the UN Security Council and the African Union's Peace and Security Council, which, by the way, met yesterday on this issue, need to step in very, very quickly. The current regional organization, IGAD, has been sidelined since the conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region. So it's not going to be very effective. Both the UN and the African Union, as well as the Arab League, have condemned the coup, but they need to go beyond words. They need to actually step in and say that this is unacceptable. We need a return to what was the status quo, the joint military-civilian interim council, and we need the timetable for elections to actually be put back on the agenda. We also need an acceleration of economic measures in the country. At the moment, one of the supporters of the military has been the Beja tribes in the northeast of the country. And they have, in recent months, blocked supplies coming in from Port Sudan. So that blockade has affected the economic situation in the country, which was already bad, to the extent that inflation is almost at 400% at present.
Sure.
So these things need to happen. Of course, the other thing that needs to happen is a change in the security situation. When we spoke last July, I said to you that the second in command on the military side is Mohammed Hamadan Dagalo, commonly known as Hemedti, who is a notorious warlord. He was the leader of the Janjaweed who committed atrocities in Darfur. Those were then transformed into the Rapid Security Forces. He still has a huge degree of control over those Rapid Security Forces, which have massed outside of Khartoum, and they basically pose a severe security threat to the country as a whole. They are known to be hostile, they are known to be violent, they're very violent against civilians and particularly against women. During the 36 days in July 2019, when protesters were clamped down on with a huge amount of force, they were responsible for multiple rapes, many injuries, and several deaths. So they need to be brought under control of a civilian administration rather than being kept loyal to Hemedti. And then last but not least, Bashir and the other 3 people wanted by the ICC should really be handed over so that they no longer pose as dire a domestic threat as they currently do, because part of the loyalty towards the military stems from the fact that Mr. Bashir is still there and people don't want him handed over, including Burhan, who led this coup, and Hemedti, because they are afraid of what the repercussions for themselves might be if Mr. Bashir and his cohorts are brought to the ICC. Also, don't discount the regional factors. Currently on the ground, I spoke to somebody on the ground via a VPN yesterday when the internet blackout was lifted temporarily or slightly lifted. And there's a very strong belief among civilians on the ground that Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, and of course Saudi Arabia, amongst the quiet supporters of this coup.
True.
So, we need to also look at the United Arab Emirates wanting, through Dubai Ports World, to dominate maritime business in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea area. Israel, as we know, is set on a diplomatic expansionist project in Africa. We've seen how they entered the African Union through the back door in recent weeks. And so there's been a lot of opposition inside the interim government regarding specifically the Emirates and Israel's role in Sudan, because the transitional government did normalize relations with Israel in recent months.
Wow, Ayesha, shukran so very much for such a concise picture of what is happening in Sudan and other parts of Africa. Do appreciate your time and do appreciate your expertise on this matter. That was Research Fellow at Africa Asia Dialogues, Ayesha Kajee. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Ayesha. Till the next time, Salamu Alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran jazeelan.
8:47 exactly. Still to come on the show in the second hour, we will be talking to a Freedom Front Plus candidate in Sepaku in Limpopo. He is Godfrey Skosana. Also on the show, we'll be crossing over to Palestine. Abir Zayad will talk to us about the most horrendous of events, atrocities that are playing out in that part of the world. I've just had a message from a listener who'd like to comment on our first interview with Advocate Paul Hoffman. And this is the story of the 30% food that lands up at landfill sites simply because SASA is so incapable of doing the right thing by obviously SASA recipients, which is children and elderly people, regarding the food parcels of 30% of unused good food. This is what our listener has to say, and I quote: SASA incurred financial losses in terms of accommodation for 2 months and subsistence and travel allowances for 9 bid evaluation committee members at the St. George's Hotel, as well as transport costs to transport the tender documents from SASSA head office to the St. George's Hotel. How absolutely ridiculous, how absolutely wasteful, and how absolutely it just indicates that you have a whole lot of incapable, inexperienced people that are working at SASSA. And it is absolutely a crying shame that this has played out, but undoubtedly the Human Rights Commission are able to make a ruling and enforce that ruling so that 30% of wasted food doesn't go to landfills anymore, that it goes to the neediest of the needy, and that we don't have to cry or bemoan the fact that we have malnourished children in our country. 8:50 exactly, time for an ad break, and we will be back with you in a minute or two.
Babu, why don't you loosen your belt a bit more?
But why now?
Well,